to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is CraigCrash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. I say that every week, but we really do have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the Colts. They just cannot win season openers. That streak continues against the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to break down that matchup. And then we're also going to talk some college football storylines, talk about the Pac-12, the Big 12, the Big 10, get into some of the big news there. And then we're also going to bring back a segment that we used to do back in the OG days. It's called Last Call, where we just kind of sound off about a topic that is near and dear to us or something that stood out to us. So a lot to get to. We spent the last 3 weeks doing football previews. Now it's finally nice to get back into the nitty gritty of the season. B. Scott, how did you enjoy your football weekend?
It was busy with family obligations and whatnot, but it was good to be able to watch meaningful football as far as the NFL goes. Watch some good college football. It was a good weekend. It's only going to get better.
Yeah, especially because next week, and we'll be talking about it, the Purdue-Notre Dame game coming
Purdue's
up.
Only an 8-point road dog.
Right. I mean, you have a Notre Dame team that just barely squeaks by Toledo, similar to what Ball State was able to do in South Bend a couple of years ago. So that should be very exciting. But let's go ahead and just get right into it here. Oh, by the way, my football weekend, I definitely, left work a little bit early yesterday to watch the Colts game, and so that was...
Hopefully your boss isn't watching.
Right. Well, I mean, they knew about it. I told them. I said, "Peace. I'm leaving. I'm going to go watch the Colts.
I'm leaving.
I'm going to go watch the Colts lose." And that is exactly what they did. The Colts lose the season opener as we shift over there. The Seahawks win 28-16. Summary of the game: the Colts were down 14-3 early on, but Carson Wentz throws his first touchdown as a Colt to Zach Pascal, a 10-yard touchdown throw. It makes it 14-10 Seahawks. Then I would say, not necessarily a dagger, but definitely a momentum changer, a play that'll take the wind out of your sails. The Colts have the Seahawks on 2nd and 20. Russell Wilson heaves a long 69-yard touchdown pass. Nice. He gets they get the 21-10 lead. At halftime does Seattle. And then late in the game, fourth quarter, Wilson hits DK Metcalf for a touchdown to make it 28-10 Seahawks. The Colts did score a touchdown in garbage time, and that brings us to the 28-16 final score. Looking at the Colts statistics, Carson Wentz, 25 for 38, 251 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Zach Pascal, 4 catches. Yeah, not bad at all. I mean, you look... I honestly, the only critique that I have of Carson Wentz is it looked like he held on to the football a little bit too long.
I think that was on the wide receivers, though.
You think so? And I mean, as far as losses on opening weekend goes, I mean, this is an opponent that's I feel like if they played
better than last year's opening season loss.
Exactly. So, last year you had the Jaguars. That was literally the only win that the Jaguars had all season. The year before was the Chargers, which, I mean, that was that was the last year that Phillip Rivers was in San Diego or LA. So, that they weren't world beaters.
The Colts were in that one right till the very end.
Right.
Actually, didn't it go to overtime or almost went to overtime?
Something like that. And then you have the year before.
Eckler just went off.
Right. And then you had the year before they lost to the Bengals. So, of the first week opponents, this is the toughest one the Colts have faced. So, yes, it goes down, obviously, in the lore of the Colts can't win on opening weekend, but, I mean, this was going to be a tough matchup.
8 straight opening weekend losses.
Yeah, I mean, 2013? I wonder who they played in 2013 to open the season. I don't remember. Yeah. So there you go, B. Scott. Get on that real quick and see. Because, yeah, I mean, it makes you feel a little bit better about it because, I mean, it was a playoff team. Now, it doesn't get any easier next week. But the Seahawks...
so the last time they won was an opening weekend win was against the Oakland Raiders, and it was 21-17.
Yeah. Was that at home or in Oakland?
It was at home.
Okay. I
And
think
then they proceeded to lose the following week to the Miami Dolphins. So
like I'm blanking on this season, but so it was 2013. So was that the first year of Luck or the second year of Luck?
I think it was first year because he was, yeah, it
Yeah.
was first year. No, second. It was second year.
I gotcha. So I mean, yeah, you have to go back to the early
Oh
Andrew Luck
wait,
era
was
to
it?
get the
It may have even been third.
no, because he got drafted in 2012. I feel like so it would have been a second
That's right.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, second year.
So, but yeah, looking at the Seahawks statistics, Russell Wilson, 18 for 23, 254 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tyler Lockett, he has these games. If you're a fantasy owner for Tyler Lockett, he has these games where he just goes off. 4 catches, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then DK Metcalf, 4 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. And so looking at this game, I mean, the Colts can't win on kickoff weekend. We talked about it, a ton. But because of that, my glass is half full rather than half empty. The Colts were 11th last season in fourth down efficiency, 61.5%. They were 0-3 on Sunday. When they were down 21-10, they fumbled on 4th and 1 at the Seattle 31, which, I mean, if they get that, the drive continues. Maybe they get, if you just get a field goal out of that one, it cuts the lead down to 8. You're still in the ball game. I mean, obviously, when you don't get a 4th down, especially when you're driving in the other opponent's territory, it's kind of a double-edged sword because, you don't really, give up terrible field position, but it does take the wind out of your sails because, especially when it's 4th and short like that. And then you have a 4th and 2 from the Seattle 18 where Carson Wentz gets sacked. So, I mean, you get maybe a couple of field goals on that. I mean, at least 2 field goals on that drive. You don't have to kick you don't have to go for 2. So you on the last touchdown. So that puts you at 17. That puts you at 23. I mean, you're right. It's 23-28 against a playoff team. Maybe the story is a little bit different. Maybe the score is a little bit different. So they were they're usually pretty good on 4th down. Weren't good on Sunday. So you expect a Frank Reich team to right the ship there. The Colts were second last season against the run. They allowed 90.5 yards per game. On Sunday they allowed 140 yards rushing. So I mean they allowed more rushing yards than they had than they typically allow, which allowed obviously and it'll if you can run the ball effectively it does open things up for the passing game as well. And speaking of the passing game, the Colts allowed 241 yards on Sunday. If you go back to last season when they were which they were 20th against the pass, they allowed 242 yards a game. So, I mean, I saw, especially early on Twitter, about how bad the secondary was playing. I was like, it's not necessarily performing any worse than it did last season, at least in the first game of the season. Talking about really the only critique on Wentz for me was he held on to the ball too long at times, but we do forget, he didn't play all preseason. He was, and so, without having played any
this
of the...
is technically his first game, and he barely played last year too.
Right. So I mean, finally healthy, finally gets an opportunity to play for the first time in a Colt uniform, preseason or regular season. He looked solid, and then, like I said before, Seahawks are a playoff team and one of the best, if not the best, division in the NFL. Lockett has some of these weeks where he can go off. I mean, it's not super crazy to think that the Colts would lose Week 1 again to the Seahawks. The Seahawks are a good team. Like I said, probably the best Week 1 opponent that the Colts have had in this stretch, or at least during the stretch while also under Frank Reich. And then also another silver lining is that we mentioned it before we went live. Every team in the AFC South lost except for the Texans, and that's because they played the Jaguars. So, I mean, the only conference win was inside the conference and not by a team that you expect to go on to win the division. The Titans got obliterated by the Cardinals. The Colts lose to the Seahawks, and then, of course, the Jaguars lose to the Texans. So, I think...
I got to say, I think my pick of the Cardinals to winning the Super Bowl or making the Super Bowl looking pretty good right now.
And my pick of having the Bills win the Super Bowl is looking not too good right now. They lose to the Steelers Week 1. But, yeah, so I think overall, I don't, and what's funny too is I don't think people are really hitting the panic button, which they shouldn't anyway. It's week one, but like, people aren't really, I think, getting too worried because of all the Colts woes week one. But this is like kind of why you should still be like still in it, still excited, ready for week two, because the Colts, despite the loss, still played well.
Right. And the only thing is the reason people may be hitting the panic button is because the two areas that looked the worst were supposed to be two areas of strength for this team, the offensive line and the defense. Now, I will say the defense made some really good adjustments at halftime, and they came out in the second half and they were playing much better. My guess is I was watching it with my dad, and I said, I bet Matt Eberflus lit into them in the locker room, and it really fired up the two big leaders in Darius Leonard and DeForest Buckner, because those guys played really well in the second half. And again, I'll say this, I said it during the preseason preview for these guys. I think the biggest loss for this team, and it's going to show on defense, is still Anthony Walker. Bobby Okereke, he's good, he's athletic and everything, but he is not as smart of a football player. His football IQ, I don't think, is as high as Anthony Walker's was. Yeah, Anthony Walker wasn't the most talented athlete out on the field, but he was kind of like a Gary Brackett. Gary Brackett wasn't the most talented athlete on the field, but Gary Brackett just read the offenses very well, he controlled the defenses. And that's what Anthony Walker was essentially doing for the Colts. And you could see there was something missing. And that I felt like that was a big key component that was missing. Because Darius Leonard can be a leader, but he's more of a lead by example, I feel like, than like direct the team in the certain direction. Like, whereas Anthony Walker was that type of player. So that's a big blow. The biggest concern for me, two biggest concerns. One, I feel like the defense will get there. They were without Xavier Rhodes. They played much better in the second half. They got a lot of pressure on Russell Wilson. The run game will come. You got to. It's still game one, so I'm not as worried about the defense. The two things that concern me, though, the offensive line, because they were overmanned. They got manhandled in the trenches. And that's not something we've seen recently from this offensive line. I told my dad, I was like, this looks like we're watching an offensive line from early on in the Andrew Luck era, where every play he was just running for his life. It felt very similar to that. And I know, like I mentioned off air, like, hey, Braden Smith re-aggravated a foot injury that he had in the preseason. So that may be a reason for the right side. The left side, you had Julian Davenport starting at tackle. Eric Fisher will be a definite upgrade. Center, though, Ryan Kelly had a rough day. I think that false start or the encroachment on the defense at one point where they jumped on the hard count and basically bull rushed Ryan Kelly, that summed up Ryan Kelly's day. The offensive line is concerning, though, because, one piece, yeah, it's a big deal, but they all just looked to be overpowered. Now, I'm looking too much into it. It may just be because, a lot of them were out quite a bit of the preseason with contact tracing from COVID or with injuries. Quentin Nelson isn't that far removed from the same foot surgery that Carson Wentz had. So, they got to take a little bit of time to get gelled back together. So, that I can see. The other one for me, though, was the wide receivers. You said Carson Wentz was holding onto the ball for a long time, which was good and bad. Good because at that point, maybe the offensive line wasn't letting defenders through super quick. But the wide receivers were getting zero separation. Zero. And that's a little bit concerning because without T.Y. Hilton, it's not like he's coming through those doors anytime soon. And they need to figure that out. I did like seeing Michael Strong play, and he comes out, he gets targeted, and he makes a big catch. I liked seeing that. I was disappointed in Mo Alley Cox's play. Jack Doyle played pretty well. I'll give him that. But
I was gonna say I was very excited to see Jack Doyle have a good performance. I know he was kind of like out of the mix last year. So
yeah, and I am interested to see how this run game fares once they get Marlon Mack back into the groove of things, because they really only seem to run Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, who, by the way, just got paid. He is now one of the 10th highest paid running backs in the league. Good for him. But I do want to point out, at one point, I don't know how many times he did it, but at one point he lined up out wide in a position that T.Y. Hilton would usually line up in. And I said, watch for Nyheim Hines to have a big part in the passing game with T.Y. Hilton now. I would like to see more of that because I think they targeted him and he did pretty well. I would like to see more of that because I feel like if somebody's going to be able to get that kind of separation, it will be him. There was positives in the receiving core. Paris Campbell looked pretty good. Zach Pascal. I just need to see more urgency out of that unit in trying to help Carson Wentz and get something open, because there was just nothing, and a lot of those times. So those are the two key things for me that are concerning. I'm not hitting the panic button by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, looking back through their schedules from the past 8 years of these opening losses, majority of them, they actually started 0-2. And looking at their schedule this year, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see them start 0-2, especially with how good the Rams looked. But I don't know if that's how good the Rams looked or how bad the Bears looked.
Yeah.
I would not be the least bit surprised to see them start 0-2. 1-1 would be great, just knowing just how the Colts are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
But the nice thing is, these first two games are not against division opponents. I mean, yeah, you want to see them win, but the first two games are also against NFC opponents. So I'm not too concerned in the grand scheme of things. You lose 2 games to NFC opponents, whatever. You know, you still have all 6 games against your division opponents, and in the end, those are the ones that truly matter, because you're not contending for home field advantage. You just need a spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, NFC opponents also from arguably the best division in the NFL. And yeah, like you said, doesn't get any easier next week. Rams defeat the Bears 34-14. Matthew Stafford 20 of 26 for 321 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, the good news is, if you're a Colts fan, is that they, like you said, they did play the Bears. We don't know how good that Bears team actually is. Now, their defense, who is usually pretty good, did allow Stafford to have a big day, and then of course the Rams have a pretty good defense as well, so it doesn't get any easier. You do get them at home, but I think there's some promising signs that may lead you to believe they can maybe pull off a win next week against the Rams.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'd be nice. Still, I'm not 100% sold on Matthew Stafford. I feel like somewhere he's gonna trip up. But yeah, it'll be interesting just because, like I said, is it the Rams? Are they that good? Or the Bears are that bad?
You also couldn't have asked for a better game to get Matthew Stafford reacclimated to
His
to a
first
new team.
pass was a 74-yard touchdown.
Well, right, but also the fact that you're playing in LA, first game at home, so you're at home, ruckus crowd,
And
ready to go, and then you also. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it doesn't hurt that you play a team that you literally played, like, twice a season for the last, like, he was drafted in 2008, so the last, 13 years, 12, 13 seasons. Doesn't hurt to be like, hey, first game of the year, you get to play the Bears, and you get to carve up an opponent that you're very familiar with. So, I mean, now he's back in the groove of things, and we'll see if that translates to the Rams being 2-0, or if it means the Colts can get their first win on the season. It's at home, right? So they literally have their... No, they go on the road against Tennessee. I was like, man, do they have the first 3 games on the road, but they go at home, but they do go on the road to Tennessee. So we'll see what happens. I mean, now I'm really nervous about the Cardinals game with how good they looked on Sunday. So we will see what the Colts are able to do. But now let's go ahead, before we get into our college football conversation, let's go ahead and talk about our friends of the show. First, we want to thank Anchor, who allows us to put the podcast on every single week. They're a podcast website where you can either record straight onto Anchor, or you can record from a third-party site or app like we do. You can upload the podcast, and once you give them your RSS feed, which is the feed that you use to podcast, it distributes it to a bunch of different platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so it does a really good job of not only distributing your podcast, but one thing that we really like about it is the fact that it saves all of your past podcasts. Before, when we were slumming it on SoundCloud, we could only keep like 2 hours worth of audio, so we were deleting podcasts, which kind of stinks. I wish we could kind of go back and see some of that old stuff, and you can for a little bit because of the RSS feed, but it does keep an archive, which is nice. So if you are looking at getting into podcasting, definitely check Anchor out. Also, just want to give a quick shout out to Eat Lunch and Board Game, a podcast that my cousin does. He's a big supporter of our podcast, and his podcast is pretty good as well, talking about the connections that you can build through playing board games with your coworkers. So that's a very good podcast to check out. So go ahead and do that if you want to, and then remember all the different ways that you can follow our podcast as well at 3C Media Sports on Twitter, Crash Course Podcast on Facebook. You can watch us on YouTube, 3C Media, and I want to take a moment to thank you guys all for the support. We've been putting out a lot of YouTube content over the last couple of weeks with getting out the individual previews for all the college football teams, IU, Purdue, Notre Dame, and then also doing a preview for the Colts. Doing the MCT podcast with those guys have been killing it as well, and then the 3C Media road trip is up as well. I'm not gonna toot my own horn. I think it's one of my better editing jobs. So definitely go check that out if you haven't already. But you guys have been, you guys have been supporting it a lot already. So I want to thank you guys all for doing that. So go check it out if you haven't already. 3C Media on YouTube. Also, we have a TikTok to get content out there. So go check that out. We've got a little bit of TikTok only content that you can check out as well. So go over there and support it if you want to. Remember, you can watch us live every week. Twitch.tv/CraigCrash. That's where you can watch us live, interact with us in the chat, let us know your opinions on all the things that we talk about, tell me how wrong I am, tell B. Scott how amazing he is, and also tell him that he's a huge Purdue homer. He loves hearing that stuff all the time. And then also, lastly, remember you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard, you can hear the Crash Course Podcast. So we want to get back into the college football storylines because there are a few cropping up early here in the season, and it's got me very excited. I'm sure as you excited as well, B. Scott. The big news of the weekend was number 12 Oregon going into Columbus and beating number 3 Ohio State 35-28. That's not the only big upset that the Pac-12 has been able to get. UCLA upset LSU week 1, 38-27. LSU was number 16 at the time. And then also Arizona State has stayed undefeated, and they are number 19 in the country. So right now, I don't think, because the reason why they were at 0.5% when we did our over-unders was because I don't think they had any team in the top 20, maybe except for Oregon. And I think Oregon
in the top 20. Okay,
yeah,
top 20.
Yeah. Oregon I think was 12, and that was it. Because UCLA wasn't ranked, and Arizona State may have been, but if they were, they weren't in the top 20. Now, you think, oh hey, that's really cool that the Pac-12 has some good teams. Like, how's the rest of the conference doing? Well, not the greatest. You do have,
like I just said. I think did I say it on air? Or did I say it off air? I don't know. USC fired their head coach today.
Yeah, USC fires Clay Helton. So
after losing to Stanford,
right? Which is odd because Stanford's a conference opponent. So like, I guess you can kind of understand it from the standpoint of like, oh well, you were. It's literally shows you the expectations that USC had, because they were like, okay, well, Clay, it's Pac-12 championship or bust this year, dude. Like, you got to the Pac-12 championship last year. You were supposed to beat Oregon. Oregon only was in that game because Washington couldn't because of COVID. And so then Oregon goes in and beats you, knocks you out of any, like, I don't know if they would have really been in a New Year's. Well, yeah, they would have, because Oregon was. So, so they're like, okay, it's Pac-12 title or bust, dude. And the second that he loses his first game in conference, they're like, all right, get out of here. We don't want you here anymore. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, as someone who was very annoyed when he was growing up watching, USC go from Carson Palmer, oh, you know what? It's they can't possibly have another quarterback waiting in the wings. Oh, hey, look, it's Matt Leinart. Okay, Matt Leinert's gone. Well, they can't possibly have another quarterback waiting in the wings. Oh, it's John David Booty, who's going to have one really good, awesome year. Oh, so it was just quarterback. Sam Darnold, just Mark Sanchez, just quarterback after quarterback that they were, churning out and having good seasons. It's kind of like how I felt about Ohio State. Like, I used to not really like Ohio State. I used to not really like USC, but the college football landscape is better when those two teams are firing on all cylinders. So USC, we'll see what they can do. Hopefully they can figure it out at some point, because it feels like there's certain college football powers that have just been in the state of limbo for like the last. Like, each have lost, like, a long time good, successful head coach, and none of them have really been back to the precipice of college football glory, whether that be, Texas loses Mac Brown. They've not been the same since. Lloyd Carr retires from Michigan. They've not been the same since. USC loses Pete Carroll, which obviously there was all the extracurriculars that were surrounding that led to that departure, but still haven't really been the same since he departed. So, we'll see. Maybe one of those teams will be back to prominence soon. But yeah, you have Montana beating number 20 Washington week 1. Montana wins 13-7. And then you have BYU defeating Arizona, and then number 21 Utah throwing that out there too, because the CraigCrash Wheel of Misery, TikTok only content. The BYU Cougars won to be the first team to win from that little segment that I do on TikTok. So, but yeah, so it leads us to this question after a solid couple of weeks of play from the Pac-12. Is the Pac-12 or the Pac-12 is a real contender for a playoff spot, hot or cold? And I think they are. It's really exciting to see the Pac-12 be better, because, again, especially, it's a breath of fresh air because of all the turmoil that's going on right now with the Big 12 not knowing what they're going to look like here in a couple of years.
They just got...
Well, right.
4 teams?
Right. And we'll talk about that here more later. But not really knowing what that conference is going to look like as far as, like, I guess saying at least this much, with the Big 12 even right now, even after adding those 4 teams, looks like there is a chance it could be the next, like, Pac-12, as far as, like, how we viewed it before the season. We were talking about losing another major competitor in the college football, like, playoff landscape, because Oklahoma is the only team that's ever made it for the Big 12. There's been no other Big 12 representative, so now that Oklahoma's moving to the SEC, there's literally no playoff caliber team that the Big 12 can hang their hat on. And that's what I'm more or less saying, is that it's the same with the Pac-12, where there's really not one team, except if Oregon's not good, then they're not getting in to the college football playoff. So it's nice to see the Pac-12 starting to get better. Now, when you looked at ranked versus ranked matchups for the rest of the season, you do have Arizona State at UCLA on October 2nd. The winner will be the front runner for the Pac-12 South. Arizona State has lost 2 straight versus the Bruins and hasn't won in Pasadena since 2015. Thinking that UCLA will win that matchup, that would set up Oregon at UCLA on October 23rd. Oregon has won 8 of the last 10 matchups versus UCLA. UCLA's last win versus the Ducks was October 2017 in Pasadena. And then maybe the Pac-12 championship will also be ranked versus ranked. Oregon has won the last 2 Pac-12 championships, and they're 4-0 in Pac-12 title games. So, like, I think the best shot is Oregon. What I'm afraid of is that they all just beat each other. Like Arizona State beats UCLA, but loses to somebody else along the line. Let's say they say Arizona. You have like Oregon loses to UCLA, or UCLA. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, so UCLA loses to Oregon, but then beats Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Like, so they go 1-1 against each other, or something that would like just knock them out. Like, I want one of those two teams to make it in, just to make it interesting. I know they'll just probably get blown out by Alabama anyway. It doesn't really matter, but like that's what I want to see. I want to see the Pac-12 be in it. And looking at the other teams they would be fighting against. They would be, you look at number 3, Oklahoma. They start 2-0. The only ranked team on their schedule is at home against number 14, Iowa State in November. So you think that, and then the Big 12 championship game for them potentially. Number 6, Clemson is the front runner for the ACC. They don't play a ranked team the rest of the season until they maybe get to the ACC championship game. And in my opinion, so with those two teams kind of like controlling their own destiny and having a kind of a easier schedule to the college football playoff, then that means, in my opinion, I think most likely the Pac-12 will be fighting against the Big Ten to get that final playoff spot. And right now, that front runner looks to be at least either Ohio State or Iowa, because obviously
Penn State.
Well, right, but Iowa right now. Well, Iowa's the top-rated Big Ten team, and they haven't won the Big Ten since 2004. So I think there is a very good likelihood that Oregon could potentially, or a Pac-12 team could possibly get into the playoff conversation. So that makes me very excited.
Yeah, I think this is a hot take. I don't think all of this madness that you're bringing up is going to happen. I honestly believe that Oregon is the Pac-12's best chance to get back into the playoff. I mean, having that Ohio State win on their resume is awesome. That actually, in my opinion, as long as Oregon keeps winning, that keeps Clemson out of the picture. I mean, Clemson, they can battle back all they want, but I honestly believe Oregon's in the catbird seat there. And also along the way, I mean, I could see Alabama or Georgia maybe more so Georgia slipping up, just because they're Georgia. I mean, right now their defense looks unbeatable, but we'll see how that continues on. The only other one that's on the outside that I think could have a chance to derail Oregon from it is Texas A&M, but heck, they even almost lost to Colorado this past weekend. So I think it's more wide open than we believe, but I think Oregon right now is the Pac-12's best bet. And the way they're playing right now, I do believe they get in if everything were to start today, regardless of, I know they're in the top 4, but they're
4th, yeah.
So, yeah.
They're at number 4 and UCLA is number 13.
Because Oregon, I just believe Oregon is playing well enough right now to be able to get in there.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm really excited. Part of me today has been trying to figure out, like, how does the loss to Ohio State potentially hurt Oregon? Because I feel like I'm in that state with the College Football Playoff Committee right now where I'm like, how could they spin zone a win over Ohio State as a bad thing for them? Because, like, if Ohio State, let's say Ohio State ends up losing the Big Ten and ends up being like number 15 or number 16, and Oregon loses like one game but is still in the mix, like how could that potentially? Because if Oregon goes undefeated, like you're right, they're in right now because they'd be an undefeated conference champion. Clemson couldn't say that because they're 11-1, lost their only real important game of the year, which sucks that it was week 1 for them. And then you would have, let's say, Iowa, what if Iowa, if it's, Yeah, I mean, I guess there couldn't be a way if they're an undefeated Pac-12 12 champion, but if someone else kind of slips up, like that's what I was going through my mind. That's what was happening is I was like, I can't really find a way that the Ohio State loss is somehow a bad not looked at as good of a win, because right now, I mean, looking at the top four teams, I mean, easily that's the best win between any of those teams so far this season. So I'm rooting for it. I hope the Pac-12 can get back to prominence, because that's what college football needs.
Yeah, I agree.
So, moving on, we talked a little bit about the Big Ten. They've had their ups and downs early in the season. We talked about Ohio State losing. That's a down for them. But the upside is that Iowa, who's ranked number 5 now, did defeat Iowa State 27-17 on Saturday. So, hot or cold, the Big Ten's playoff ticket rests with the Hawkeyes. For me, that is a cold take, and I'll tell you why. That's the point. Ohio State, in the playoff era, has only lost twice to a non-conference opponent. And, I mean, at least in the regular season. You go back to 2014, the Buckeyes lost to Virginia Tech at home. They defeated number 13 Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game and won the playoff and won the title. That was the crazy Cardell Jones year. In 2017... they lost to number 5 Oklahoma, but also lost to Iowa that season. They did defeat number 4 Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game, and they were left out of the playoff. So the only reason they were left out of the playoff is because they had 2 losses. They're still obviously, in the catbird seat as far as winning. If they were to win out, obviously they'd be in the Big Ten championship game, possibly against Iowa. And then you have an Iowa team that, as I just mentioned, hasn't won the Big Ten since 2004, which includes, I think it was, 2014 or 2015 when they had an opportunity to get in. It was them versus Michigan State in the Big Ten championship game. Michigan State ended up upsetting them. So, I mean, they're remaining schedule for Ohio State, they've got 2 ranked matchups remaining this season, October 30th versus number 10 Penn State. Penn State has lost 8 of the last 10 to the Buckeyes. The last one in Columbus came in 2011, and then, of course, against Michigan, but we know that Ohio State has really owned that rivalry. And then Iowa, they still play number 10 Penn State. It is at home. Penn State has won 6 of 7 against Iowa. Then you have October 30th at number 18 Wisconsin. Wisconsin has won 7 of the last 10 games. So, I mean, even so, statistically, the matchups don't super favor the Hawkeyes. They definitely have a tougher schedule the rest of the way, and so Ohio State still, I think, has an opportunity and has a real chance. I mean, let's say they run the table. It includes a win against Penn State. It includes a win over Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. So it's not one of those situations where even if Iowa loses, let's say, along the way, and it's still Iowa versus Ohio State, that still would be a big win for the Buckeyes and be enough to launch them into the championship. So, I mean, or launch them into the college football playoffs. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if this is the first year where a team other than Ohio State gets in, because typically if Ohio State doesn't win the Big Ten, then nobody from the Big Ten gets in. But
I think that's different this year.
Yeah, I think it might be different this year, but I don't think that the Hawkeyes are the only way the Big Ten gets in.
Yeah, this is definitely a cold take. It's not just Iowa or bust. There is a path still for Ohio State to get there. There's a path for Iowa to get there. And there's also a path for Penn State to get there. Don't sleep on the Nittany Lions. They've looked pretty good this year. I mean, are they?
I mean, they did beat the Fighting Ball State Cardinals this past weekend.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I hate it. Somebody said, "Oh, what a Bleacher Report did winners and losers of the weekend," and one of the losers was the MAC because how bad Ball State got beat. I'm like, Penn State's really, really good, but this Ball State team is still good.
Right.
They're not on the same level.
They're not a top 10 team in the country.
Yeah.
If you haven't noticed.
Penn State has a good team. I think if I had to rank the teams of the best bet of getting into the playoff, I think of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten, I think I would probably put Penn State third behind. Right now, I'll put Iowa ahead of Ohio State just because they are in the catbird seat after beating Iowa State with Ohio State losing to Oregon. But, that's a constant changing top 3, I have a feeling, this year, depending on week to week. But, yeah, it's definitely a cold take. There's 3 teams, in my opinion, that have a legitimate shot from the Big Ten. And also, the Big Ten is it's deep. It's getting deeper. Look, Michigan's ranked now. I mean, that Big Ten East, not easy, not easy at all. Iowa at least has a little bit more of a cakewalk in the Big Ten West. I mean, the biggest challenge is Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I mean, Northwestern doesn't look to be as strong. Nebraska's Nebraska. Illinois, Minnesota is not. I mean, they lost Muhammad Ibrahim already this year, their number one running back. I mean, they barely squeaked by Miami of Ohio this past weekend. I mean, we don't know what Purdue truly is. They've beaten Oregon State and UConn, so the verdict's still out on them. So right now, Iowa is sitting pretty to make a run to the Big Ten championship game, and they could be playing somebody that is pretty beat up from the Big Ten East. So right now, Iowa definitely has a better shot of anybody in the Big Ten to get to the playoff, but they're not the only shot for the Big Ten.
Yeah, the spirit of the question was more or less, because the way I was thinking of it is like usually in these situations, if Ohio State has lost, Ohio State is lost just in general, it usually kicks them out of the running for the college football playoff. But but as long as they can still run the table in the conference, I mean that's gonna basically be what ends up happening. But
when you look at Ohio State in the past, during the playoff era, when they've lost in non-conference, it was at home to Virginia Tech,
right,
and at home to Oklahoma. Those years, the Big Ten was not quite as deep as it has been. It was maybe Michigan or maybe Penn State, like one or the other. It wasn't all of the above. So for Ohio State, that really bodes well for them that their side of the Big Ten is really good. And so they have an opportunity to really get some quality wins still on their schedule. I mean, also, the committee, when it comes down to it, they're going to say, they're still going to look at it. It was week 2. Yeah. And you lost by a touchdown. Your quarterback still threw for over 500 yards. Also, it's a money thing. And Ohio State, you bring in lots of money. Money. The beautiful green stuff.
And that brings us at least what I'm going to get to here with the last topic of conversation here in college football, which is the Big 12. They added some teams, as we mentioned a little bit earlier on in the segment. The conference votes to add BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. BYU will join in 2023. The rest will join in 2024. As of now, this is what the Big 12 would look like. It would be Baylor, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, UCF, and West Virginia. So the question is, hot or cold, adding these teams is enough to stabilize the Big 12, and I actually say it's a cold take, and I will tell you why. It should be a hot take if you're talking about on-the-field production, just because of the quality of teams that you're adding. You're adding BYU, who since 2018 is 27-13. They finished 11th in the country in 2020. Cincinnati, we know about their success. They're currently number 8. They finished ranked in 2018 and 2020. They are the 2020 AAC champions. They made a Sugar Bowl appearance last season. They're 33-6 since 2018. Houston's kind of the only team that's not very good that they're adding, or at least hasn't been good lately, but is still a good name. They're 15-18 since 2018, and then UCF, we know about them, self-proclaimed national champions from a few years ago. They are 30-8 since 2018, and they have a 2018 AAC title and Fiesta Bowl appearance. And you look at some of the other teams that have left the Big 12. Texas A&M is really the only former Big 12 team with notable success since the last realignment. Colorado, Missouri, and Nebraska have all struggled in their new conference. So when you look at other Big 12 teams that have left, they haven't been very successful. You look at the Big 12 overall, adding more successful teams who, once they kind of get that streamlined recruit. I mean, we see TCU has had some success, has had a little bit of success since joining the Big 12. Maybe not necessarily as far as competing for anything nationally, except for that first year when they tied with Baylor for the Big 10 or Big 12 championship. But I mean, we've seen some other teams have success moving to the Big 12, getting that better recruiting and that kind of thing to boost some of these programs that are already good up. So if you think about it, like, hey, adding these teams boosts your conference up. It's still easier to maybe win this conference. If you're Oklahoma State and Iowa State, this is easier to win this conference than it will be to move to the Big Ten. If you're West Virginia, it's going to be easier to win the Big 12 than it will be to move to potentially the ACC or the Big 10. So it makes more sense for some of these schools to just say, okay, you know what, we're back at 12 teams, which remember they're at 10, so they can go back if they want to divisional play. And have a true Big 12 championship game. We're adding good teams. We're still basically the same regionally as what we've been. This is a good move and a big move, but as we've seen from what Texas and Oklahoma have done, because these same things also applied to them. Doesn't make sense for them to leave the Big 12. This is their best chance to win a conference and make it to the college football playoff, as Oklahoma has shown. Oklahoma is the only Big 12 representative to ever make the college football playoff. So why would you leave? Because it's all about what B. Scott just talked about, the green stuff, money. Money, unfortunately, drives results. Yes, I am jaded now completely for the rest of humanity. But yeah, it's money, not results, drives everything, as we've seen. The conference is also not part of any agreements. We've seen the alliance. We don't know how strong that alliance is, but the Big 12 hasn't agreed to anything, and no other conference has agreed to not poach any teams. So Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Iowa State, whoever are still in play for these other conferences to potentially poach. I mean, I've heard talks about like Texas Tech and the Pac-12, which that would honestly boost them quite a bit. So I mean, it doesn't make sense. Just kind of like we've talked about with Texas and Oklahoma, it doesn't really make sense to leave from a pure results competition aspect, but it's all about the money. So we'll see in the future. I hope it does stabilize the Big 12, but I'm still not convinced that we're not going to see something more happen with this. It's not just going to be, hey, we added 4 teams, we're good now, you guys good, we're good, all right, let's go forward. I wish that was the case, because then we could get back to talking about the 12-team playoff, which is a far superior option and would fix everything, and let's get that going as quickly as possible. But I just don't see it. Like I said, I'm jaded.
I do like this move. I'm going to say this is a hot take. The Big 12 has never been a big power here as of late. And yeah, you're getting rid of Oklahoma, but I think now this is going to allow the conference to spread its wings. Because before it was Oklahoma and Texas and then everybody else in the pecking order. I think now it's really going to open up competition more. I think. Yeah, is there going to be growing pains? Yeah, there's going to be growing pains. Are they going to be left out of the playoff occasion most of the time, early on? Yeah, probably. But guess what? I think in the long run, this is a good thing, because the teams that they added have had recent football success. I mean, BYU is not a slouch by any stretch of the imagination. Cincinnati is one of the better teams in the country right now. UCF was a national champion a couple of years ago. Houston, that's a no-brainer. Wasn't Houston originally a part of...
They might have been part of like the Big 8 or whatever it was. South? Yeah, Big South or Big 8, whatever it was.
Big 8, yeah. So, I think it's actually a rather good move. The only one that I was kind of surprised didn't get a look, maybe because they're just not there yet, but SMU, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, adding Houston, adding Cincinnati, that's big, and I think UCF as well, because guess what? The Big 12 now has a footprint in Florida. That's huge in recruiting, because the Big 12 will now consistently come to the state of Florida, and also vice versa. The state of Florida is now going to consistently come to the state of Texas. it's big. I mean, they're now in areas that they weren't before, and I think that this helps the conference short term. No, it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough because they're going to have to build up their reputation because their reputation is leaving to the SEC essentially. But I think in the long run, this is going to do very well for this conference. It's going to make it deeper, in my opinion.
Do you know what program is punching the air right now as far as not getting an invite to anything?
Kansas?
No, Kansas is actually like, man, we've been trying to break up this conference so we can leave and go to like the MAC or something for the last, like, at least the football side of things. Can you imagine if Kansas joined the MAC? And like, because remember, basketball usually takes the back seat to everything,
That's
so we
that would be so bad.
that would well, because what's funny is like I was making the joke the first time realignment came around. They were talking about Kansas potentially to the Mountain West because the Mountain West had BYU, Utah. They had TCU. I think. Yeah, I was gonna say I think that was right around the time the WAC was folding, so they got Boise State as well. So they were like, oh, could maybe Kansas go to the Mountain West? And I was like, the other basketball schools in the Mountain West are crapping themselves right now because they're like, oh, what? We gotta play Kansas now? What is this? And then it's funny because like some of those schools, like TCU,
also you got to think about it though. That was the way the Big 12 was for a long time in basketball too.
Yeah.
What? We got to play Kansas?
This doesn't seem fair. I don't like this at all. No, but that's the team I feel like is punching the air is Boise State. I feel like they've always been kind of. There was of course that one stretch of time where they were rumored to potentially like right after they had Kellen Moore, maybe it was after Jared Zabransky, where they were talking about them going to the Big East, and then like it was a no-brainer they should join the Pac-12, and then they're still in the Mountain West. So it's kind of I could see them maybe, especially now. Now the AAC is going to be looking for some teams, although they go from 11 to 8, so they may just be chilling. So we'll see.
They're like, we're good.
Yeah.
We don't have enough money to be able to travel over to Boise, Idaho, for everybody. Not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see them expanding.
Right. I mean, so
honestly, I can see them be like, we're folding.
Right. And that's the scary thing.
All their good teams are gone.
Right.
All of their good teams are gone.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking, like, if the AAC were to expand, and now we're drifting into 2011 Cardinal College Game Day here.
Hope on the line.
Yeah. I was like, man, could like Ball State join the AAC? Like,
they're so entrenched in the MAC.
That's true. Although I don't really know that I want.
Like
I think
Marshall,
right,
or Charlotte,
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I think like the MAC is a better conference to be in than the AAC, at least now.
Because it's more established.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the scary thing is that my like worst case scenario, which is like all I let myself ever think in, is what could the worst case scenario be, and that's that. I don't know if this move necessarily stabilizes the Big 12, and then what if they become the Big East and they just all disintegrate and have to go to the respective areas? But because
what if Butler came out of the FCS, went to the FBS, and they reformed the Big East in football? Well, Villanova joined suit as well.
Right. And I mean, talk about basketball taking a second.
If UConn jump down to the FCS.
I mean, UConn probably at this point should. But yeah, so that's our college football conversation for this week. Let's go ahead now and move into last call, which if you're new, which most of you, if you're watching this or listening to this, you probably don't remember. Or if you do, you have to repress memory, something, I don't know. But
yeah, they're sitting in the corner right now, rocking back and forth. Oh God, no! Please, not last call.
We're gonna pull out last call. Last call is a segment. If you're unfamiliar, basically it's kind of like the end of Sports Reporters, that old show where we just have a topic that we want to talk about, and that's what we're gonna sound off on. Whether it's a subject that's near and dear to us, or whether it's just something cool that we've seen. I kind of have 1A and 1B. I couldn't think of one like specifically to like focus on, which is funny because I'm the one that texted you like, hey, should we do last call, because just in case the show, we run through the first few segments really quickly, and you're like, sure, and then I'm like, I kind of have what I want to talk about and I kind of don't. One thing really, I mean, you have a lot of things from this past weekend that really stand out. You know, What thing number one, 1A for me, is Chris Bryant coming back to Wrigley Field for the first time since being traded. That was a nice emotional moment. Made me, cry a little bit, crack open a beer, and curse the Ricketts for a while. Now, in that conversation, it does make you think about what the Cubs do have. Because we've seen since the trade deadline guys like Frank Schwindel and Patrick Wisdom and Rafael Ortega really blossom. So it'll be interesting to see what the Cubs have in store going forward. So that was one thing that I thought of. I was like 1A for me, and I was like, I want to give a shout out to Chris Bryant. Thank you for all he's done for the Cubs organization as he returns to Wrigley Field. So that was a cool thing, but a even crazier thing happened. B. Scott, you've seen the footage. I'm going to now do something we've not yet done on the podcast, and my stream quality is already in the red, so I'm sure this is going to maybe push us off the air, so I guess hang tight here. I'm going to show you guys the video that really caught everyone's attention, and that is the video of the cat at Miami. If you haven't seen it yet, we'll scroll down here. This is the original video. Cat just dangling. I don't know how the cat got up there or what it's doing.
I want to know. I need to know the whole backstory.
That's the big mystery, but he's just clinging on by a thread here. I want to know who this guy in the orange shirt is that's barely reaching over and not moving in his hand, is all trying to get the cat. He receives an F for effort. But then an amazing catch by the fan. Although it wasn't really a catch, he broke the fall of the cat with the American flag. There's nothing better than that. Here's another angle of it. Actually, that's at the end of the video. We'll back it up now. Just crazy. Very scary. I'm glad the cat's okay. But yeah, wild. Very wild incident there. So crazy. Shout out to the fan. Non-shout out to the guy who didn't reach over the edge far enough, and and wasn't even trying. But shout out to the guy with the American flag. The Twitterverse says he is a facilities manager at Miami. And the best moment was he held him up like Simba at the end as well. So a cool moment out of and a happy ending to a scary situation. So a couple of things that caught my eye from the weekend, B. Scott.
So for me, we've talked about it quite a bit on here. Everything with the new NIL, name, image, likeness stuff. We talked about like how is it's going to get out of hand? How is this going to work with is it who's going to be the first one to crack a huge contract? Well, we all found out the first one to crack a huge deal was Alabama quarterback Bryce Young, who signed a deal that totals around $1 million, which isn't surprising. At that point in time, the highest contract or NIL agreement was to a football player on the number one team in the country. Well, not anymore. The financials behind it aren't fully out there, but the new technically highest NIL agreement now goes to a wrestler, of all things. Olympic gold medalist and NCAA national champion heavyweight Gable Steveson recently announced that he would be returning to Minnesota for this upcoming season after winning a gold medal. He had all these options laid out in front of him. Go to the WWE, go to the UFC, go back to Minnesota. Well, because he did choose to go back to Minnesota, but he did sign an NIL agreement with the WWE. He's able to do this. You'd be thinking, well, wait a second, that's a wrestler going into pro wrestling. You're right. However, the WWE and pro wrestling in that era is not considered a pro sport in technical terms. It is actually considered entertainment. It is sports entertainment. So by signing a deal with the WWE, he is able to be part of promotions for the WWE, building up hype around his eventual debut within the WWE. He won't be taking any matches because obviously that would conflict with competing for Minnesota. But part of his deal with the WWE is also that when he does make his debut, he will be right on the main roster of the WWE. Whether that's Raw or SmackDown is yet to be seen. There's options of potentially him teaming up with his brother, who just signed a contract with the WWE as well, even though it is most likely leaning towards an individual storyline where he will join up with the other former Minnesota heavyweight national champion, Brock Lesnar, and longtime manager, heel manager, whatever you want to call him, Paul Heyman, or promoter, Paul Heyman. So it is going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. But it is really exciting, the fact that the biggest agreement in the NIL era now goes to a wrestler rather than a football player. Never would have thought we saw that one coming, but it is pretty exciting. Can't wait to see how that expands or that unfolds for Gable, not just this season. I mean, I don't think it's going to affect his wrestling at Minnesota at all, but it'll be interesting to watch his future into the WWE because, truthfully, covering college wrestling, Gable Steveson he is a freak athlete. I mean, come on. He won the national championship and proceeded to do a backflip, a huge, he just floated through the air backflip. You don't see guys that much moving like that. And then, he's also a big personality as well. So being able to, see that on the WWE stage is going to be really a fun thing to follow. So congratulations to him. I mean, one of his dreams, he said, growing up as a kid was to be able to sign with the WWE. This summer has got to have been quite a whirlwind for him, winning Olympic gold and then achieving your other dream of being a future WWE wrestler. So good for him, good for the sport of wrestling all around. Everybody's talking about it right now. Exciting times for sure.
Yeah, I think it really exemplifies why the way that the NIL is set up is the perfect solution to the whole debacle of should college athletes get paid, because that was the very argument is how do you pay everybody equally? How do you make everybody feel warm and fuzzy inside? Because obviously the star quarterback is going to get paid more than the guy on the wrestling team, and then here's evidence that obviously that's not the case. So that's pretty cool. That's a very cool story to follow.
Yeah, it's going to be fun just because from the entertainment side of things, it's going to draw more fans to the sport of college wrestling this season. Those WWE fans are now going to be watching every Minnesota match that they can get their hands on. So that means the Big Ten Network's going to have a big push. The tickets potentially for the NCAA championships are going to have a big push because everybody's going to want to see Gable Steveson, not just because he won an Olympic gold, but because of the WWE as well. It's going to be a great boost for the entire sport all the way around. It's going to be great.
Well, that will do it for
huge day for the sport.
Huge day for wrestling. Well, that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at 3C Media Sports. You can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Go to our YouTube channel, 3C Media. We have a lot of content that just went live. Thank you guys all for your support on all the college football previews, as well as the Colts preview, the 3C Media road trip. All that stuff is up. A lot of fun to do that. Also, thank you guys for all the love on the MCT podcast as well. Those guys are killing it. You can watch our podcast, their podcast, and all the content that we've just put up. It's pretty crazy, the amount of content we're getting up. Also, we're on TikTok. Some TikTok-specific content is up and running, so go ahead and check that out. 3C Media on that platform as well. Remember, you can interact with us on Twitch. twitch.tv/CraigCrash if you want to tell us your opinions in the chat. Dusty here, as always, was asking about if Green Bay forgot to play football. Apparently, they did forget how to play football yesterday. And now I'm kind of sweating bullets because Jameis Winston isn't on any team in my fantasy league, so I may have to see if I can.
Now.
Yeah, exactly.
Got that claim in
right
now.
Get that waiver claim going.
You just put it out in the universe, and somebody's like, "I'm doing it now."
Right, go get Jameis Winston now. So yeah, go ahead, come over and interact with us in the chat, and then remember that you can listen every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course podcast. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me at Brandon_Scott87 on Twitter, and also let us know what you guys are thinking about our high school football coverage. We're really trying to get a lot of high school football scores out there, promoting some of those teams, those players and everything. If there's a team that you would like to see us interact with more, let us know for sure. And we'll start getting more involved with those teams as well. But something we're trying to get more involved with. So let us know what you think of that. And if there's anything else you would like to see from us.
Yeah, I mean that's a good call by you for saying that, because we are trying to amp up our coverage a little bit on that side of things. So yeah, if there is any school you want to see covered or any content you'd like to see, let us know. You can also follow me at Crash Course FM. We've got a big podcast again next week. We're going to be talking about, among other topics, the Purdue game against Notre Dame. We're going to be, getting into that as well. So more football coverage as well as some other things on the docket. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We hope to see you there. But until then, have a good week, everybody.